I guess this is a 50-50.
Just another beautiful day in the electric city. Wait, what's that sound? Oh my god! It's the electric bugaboo!
All right, I think we got it. Alright, so we're back with the second part of our little electrical setup mini-series for our Sprinter here. In our first video, we went over how we ran all of the AC and DC wires within our van and then connected them to our little distribution panel. So if you haven't seen that, make sure to go check it out. And in this video, we're going to focus on our system as a whole. Now, when it comes to running an electrical system within your van, you need to have a sufficient battery bank that will run everything that you plan on powering within it, as well as multiple charging methods so that you don't deplete those batteries to like a dangerous level. And yeah, it involves a lot of stuff. And I'm sure 80% of you are gonna tune out of this and have already clicked the thumbnail with the half-naked girl trying to show you how she showers within her van. But if you're one of those people who actually plan on converting a van and living in it full time, maybe try to stick around a little while.
We're going to be covering a lot of information in this video, and so we'll be segmenting it into multiple chapters. So if there's something specific that you want to view, you can jump to that point in the video.
Now, I will point out, by this point in time in your build, if you're watching this video, you should probably already know all of the electronics you're going to have in your van that you need to provide power to. But if you haven't gone and done a little power audit yet, I'll provide a link to a video where Nate from Explorist.Life kind of walks you through the steps you need to take. And I'll also provide links to several of the wiring diagrams that he's put together for people to purchase. And honestly, I'm going to link way too many things to the Explorist.Life website. Everything you could think of when it comes to van conversion electrical, they have covered, and they've done it in great detail. This is my way of saying thank you to those two for doing all that, because it's helped us out immensely. We're not professional electricians, even remotely. Like, we have a basic idea on how things work, and we've been learning along the way. So if there are things in this video that aren't exactly right, go ahead and point it out. But if there's an issue, you should leave a solution to it or a link to it so that we can then go and figure it out. All right, now with that, let's get started on our armpit scratching. Subscribe! I just wanted to add it in a different spot in our video. Usually we put it toward the end, but you know,
you guys don't
I think only
the end.
10% of you actually make it to that point. So I'm doing it right here. It helps us. And look it, she's got ripped knees.
I'm
look at this. I got ripped hips.
We need clothes.
All right, so now let's talk about our batteries.
So if you've been following along with the channel since the beginning, you'll know that Ben's first van had two 200 amp hour AGM batteries. And that was mostly because you were on a tight budget.
Yeah, anyway, after my first year of living in a van, over the winter, I had depleted the batteries down way too low, and I became an official battery murderer. So at that point, I learned what not to do with an AGM battery, and since I had to completely replace them, I figured that would be a good time to try out lithium. So I went ahead and built my own. And again, that was because I was on a tight budget.
Now, for the sake of time, we're not gonna go over all the difference between lithium and AGM batteries because there's already a lot of information out there that covers it. But if you're looking for us to explain it in a more quirky and really entertaining way, drop a comment and we can always come out with a video for that later.
Really entertaining is a stretch. So this time around, we went with 4 100 amp hour lithium batteries from Battleborn. And you might be thinking, whoa, your budget went way up. Well, no, we're still very poor. We just partnered with Battleborn, and they were kind enough to send us all of our batteries and Victron products so that we could build out this van and make this somewhat comprehensive video for your viewing pleasure. Ew.
Anyway, we didn't just get the standard 100 amp hour batteries either. Oh no. We got the fancy heated lithium batteries. And why did we do that?
Batteries in general don't like the cold. And when you live in a van full time, you're most likely going to run into freezing temperatures, especially if you like playing in the snow. Luckily, Battleborn already thought about that and built housings that have heating components within it. Proprietary heating components. If you have any questions on how those heated batteries work, Battleborn has a frequently asked questions page on their website that you can check out, and it'll probably answer anything that you've got.
Now, we decided to go with 400 amp hours after working with the Battleborn team and going through all of the items that we would need to be powering. You'll also want to figure out where and how you'll be installing your system within your van.
And it's also important to keep in mind you want to put it in a location that you will still have access to once your van is completely done, because inevitably you will have to troubleshoot something, and there are times when you need to shut the entire system off when you're not in the van.
So after we gathered all of our supplies, which we'll show you as we go, we started assembling our electrical housing. We decided to do all of our framing with aluminum extrusion, which we're gonna do a whole separate video on a little bit later, so we'll show you how that actually turned out. But for now, this is what we came up with.
So since we had 4 batteries in such a tight space, we lined 3 of them up and put 1 to the side. We then used straps to tether the batteries into our little electrical compartment. I'm shaking the van.
And then it was on to wiring. So we started by hooking the heated terminals together.
Okay, so our batteries are kind of cool because they come with an internal heating kit. If you don't travel with like the warm weather and stuff, you're gonna run into like freezing conditions. In that case, you won't be able to charge your lithium batteries without damaging them. And so they put these internal heating components within these batteries that will bring them up to 45 degrees, so it's safe to charge them even during those colder months. So you have these 14-inch jumper cables, wires, and they come with these little like locking connects on them. And so what we're gonna do is kind of daisy chain or jump every battery to one another. You'll see here, you're gonna go 1, doop, and you'll connect another one on top of it and go here, and then we're gonna go all the way, you can't see it, it's right there, and connect these 2. We have 2 connections on this one, and this one, and the bolts that come in here are 4mm, if you can see that. In the little kit, they send you with 5mm bolts. So, can you see the height difference? 4 versus 5. You need the 5mm for all the spots you're gonna have double connections. So we'll stay with the 4mm on this first one, but then we're gonna go to 5, 5, and 5. And I'm not trying to go crazy tight, just enough so that I know it's gonna hold on there. 3 batteries wired together. And then this last one is gonna go on there, but then we're gonna connect our switch. One, you'll notice, has just a regular ring terminal connector dealio. And that's gonna go to your main battery connection here. Then on this one, you have another one of those locking guys, which goes on this portion. We'll connect these 2, and then this one's gonna connect to the battery's positive, the main positive, and then they're gonna both meet up. You have these quick connects here. They will connect to a switch, and that will then turn our heated battery system on and off. So like during the summer's months and warmer months, we won't need this. Connections, you know? They also say you need to end on the highest volt battery. So I'm assuming that's the end, like your main positive you're gonna be feeding off of. And so that's what we did. This is our tail end. So this battery connects to this battery, connects to this battery, ends on this battery. Pretty clean and simple, honestly. They give you all the components you need. It's really straightforward wiring, and hopefully it saves our batteries. With that done, it was time for us to wire our batteries in parallel. And the reason we did that over series was because we wanted a 12-volt system. Now, when you wire your batteries in series, the voltage stacks instead of the amp hours. So we had 4 batteries at 12 volts. 12 times 4 is 48. So we would have ended up with a 48-volt system at 100 amp hours. Instead, we wired it in parallel so that the amp hours added and it stayed a 12-volt system. So in the end, our 4 times 100 amp hours gave us a 400 amp hour battery bank. Now, in order to wire your batteries together, you need wire, along with several other things, including lugs, heat shrink, some large gauge wire cutters, a lug crimping tool, and a heat gun. The nice thing about Battleborn batteries is that they already come with mounting hardware. Now, the size of the wire, the length you need, and the amount of lugs is all gonna be dependent on the configuration of your system. If you're not sure on the size wire you need and the length, I'm gonna provide another link to the Explorist Explorist.Life website where they have a calculator that does that for you. You can also follow one of their diagrams where it's already done, which is what we did. For us, we had 5 feet of 4/0 wire and 16 4/0 5/16 lugs.
So the next step is gonna be almost the same for every connection that we'll make within the video. So we're just gonna explain this once. You take a measurement between your connections, cut your wire, strip back your sheathing to expose the copper, crimp on a lug.
You'll see it pinches it on the sides there and then really cracks down right there.
And heat shrink.
Looking like that.
Bing, bang, boom.
Bang. Then to connect your lugs to each terminal, you're going to take a washer and then the bolt through the terminal. Then you take your lug and another washer and then a stop nut, and then you tighten it all down. And when you're making 2 connections on a single terminal, make sure they're on the same side. That way, the power running through the batteries just has to jump to one side rather than going through the whole terminal to get to both of those lugs. And we want to quickly apologize for some of the footage we got during this. We were in a crunch for time and we had to whip our system together for a trip a while back. So some of our filming is underneath a bed with not much light. So
Crunch for time, crunch for space.
Uh-huh.
Most of our battery connection lengths turned out to be about 7 inches, except our main negative and our main positive connections, which had to be a bit longer to reach to our Lynx distributor, which is what we're going to talk about next.
So what is a Lynx distributor? Well, it's basically 2 bus bars with 4 fuse holders.
And what's a bus bar, you might ask?
A bus bar is just a metallic strip that conducts and grounds electricity and then distributes it throughout your system. On your way to the Lynx distributor, you're going to need to install a fuse on your main positive line, a battery master disconnect, and you'll also want to connect your BMV 712 battery monitor if you'd like to have a wireless battery monitoring system.
So let's start with your main negative line. So when you connect your battery bank to the Lynx distributor, you want to take your positive and your negative wires from opposing battery sides. So if you start on one end with your positive, you want to use the last battery in your system for the negative. And you want to try and keep those wire lengths the same. This will help ensure that your battery bank drains and charges equally, since both wires will have about the same resistance.
Now, before we connected our negative to the Lynx distributor, we first connected our battery monitor shunt. And you'll notice that the bolt on the shunt is a bit bigger than the bolts that you get to mount to the batteries. So you're gonna have to get a 4/0 3/8 wire lug. And the shunt has a battery side and a load and charge side. So make sure that when you connect the line coming from your battery, that it goes to the side that says battery. Then you can add another negative 4/0 wire to the negative terminal of the Lynx distributor, or to save on wire, you can grab one of the adapters that Explorist.Life makes and directly connect it to that.
Last thing, before you tighten everything down, is you're gonna need to add a ground to your system, and you can do that right to the negative shunt.
So we have our main negative connected, and it is going to that Smart BMV dealio, which is then gonna get grounded over on the wall here. That's it, and it goes there. So now I have to sand off the paint, get a bare metal, and then I'm just gonna self-tapper it because we don't really have space to get a wrench behind it and put one of these bolts in there. We picked a spot that was close to the Lynx distributor that we then sanded down to the bare metal and then attached to it using a self-tapper with a washer. Grounded. Okay, so our negatives are good. All right, so now let's talk about connecting that positive line from your battery bank to the distributor. This is where you're gonna wanna connect your system's main A&L fuse to. Again, a fuse protects your wires from too much flow if there's a fault in the circuit. So we'll be installing fuses for all the connections we make throughout this video. And if you're unsure of what size fuse you need, you can again refer to a little calculator that Explorist.Life made, and it will help you calculate that. So just like your negative, you're gonna figure out the distance from your battery to that little fuse holder and crimp on a 4/0 5/16 lug to connect to the battery terminal. And then on the other side, you're gonna use a 4/0 3/8 lug to then attach to the fuse block. Okay, so this is gonna be our inline fuse for the main battery positive, and it's a 400 amp A-N-L. Ta-da. And if you blow it, that goes. Tighten it down. I believe our cable is gonna enter this side, so I'm gonna snap this piece off.
You know the way your hair is, you look like you have some wicked sideburns.
I popped that tab out.
Good job.
It's gonna sit like this. The wire's gonna come in here and come out there. So I'm gonna loosen these guys up so we can make those connections. All right, so I've pre-connected this simply because it's getting kind of hard to reach stuff down inside here. And this is gonna come off the battery, and then this is gonna go to our main on-off switch. But before you attach your positive line to the main terminal of the battery, you can also add in the power line to that BMV 712. We're gonna connect the power for our smart shunt. You can also connect that somewhere within the Lynx distributor if you'd like, but we connected it directly to the battery so that it would always be on even when we turned off our master kill switch. All right, so now the little power cable coming from our battery bank that's gonna go to our shunt, it just slides in to this little quick connecty dealio here, and it'll click, and that's in there good, just like that. And then in your kit, you'll also have one of these guys. This is what communicates to the Bluetooth device, which then communicates to your phone. It goes up into here, like that. And then this runs to this guy. So now all we gotta do is take this little cable, plug it in the back, and we've got ourselves our little monitor. With those connections made, then you're gonna run another positive line from the opposing end of that fuse block and connect to one of the sides of that master switch. And then on the opposing side of the switch, you can add another one of those adapters or another piece of wire to then run to the positive terminal of the Lynx distributor. Hello, it is me from the future. But I just wanted to kind of restate what we just did. So if you look at our batteries, we got our first battery to second to third to fourth, and then coming off of this fourth battery, we run down into our 400 amp fuse, which then runs up to our main on-off switch, which then goes to our Lynx distributor, powering that first bus bar. And then when we go to our negatives, it starts on the opposing battery. So we start on this battery as 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Then from our fourth battery, we run all the way over to our battery monitor shunt. And then we run into our Lynx distributor here on the bottom bus bar, but we also ground the system here off of that to our chassis. And when it comes to that Bluetooth monitor, you have this little guy running off the end of it, but you also can connect wirelessly to your phone using the Victron Connect app. And there are a lot of settings you can go and kind of adjust the size of your batteries and the voltage of your system, things like that. But your settings are all going to be dependent on the type of system you have. And lastly, I just wanted to point out, if you haven't noticed already yet, we are jumping around quite a bit in this video. So the way that we hooked up our system, or at least the order in which we did it, is different from the order that we're showing it within this video. So kind of just bear with us. We wanted to jump from one item to the next. But since we've already gone through how we hooked up our batteries to the Lynx distributor, now let's jump to our big 3000 watt Multiplus inverter. So what is an inverter? Well, an inverter converts a direct current into an alternating current. And most home appliances like stoves or TVs or microwaves run on an alternating current, or AC. And in our van, we're going to be powering a few items like a blender and an induction cooktop, as well as charging things like our computer and laptop. And yes, you can do 12 volt connections for those smaller items and maybe even some of those larger items, but for ease, we just installed a few outlets throughout the van. And since our batteries are 12 volt DC, we need to take that and convert it to AC, which is where the inverter comes in. But our inverter also has a couple other functions. It also allows us to plug into shore power and take the AC power and turn it to DC so that we could charge our batteries. And if you're interested in an in-depth scientific explanation for how different types of inverters work with inductors and flux capacitors, you can check out the Engineering Mindset on YouTube. They have easy to follow animations that narrate exactly how the process works. But for now, we're just gonna focus on why we chose this specific inverter for our build. So why 3000 watts? Well, we plan on running an induction cooktop because I wanted to try to avoid propane for this build. And that runs around 1800 watts with a peak of 3000 watts. So we needed to have enough power to run it. And this inverter requires quite a few connections, so we're gonna show you how we wired it into our system. To start off, you're gonna wanna connect the inverter to your Lynx distributor like we just did with our batteries. Oh yeah, and by this point, you should have removed the main panel from the Lynx distributor and the Multiplus. They're just held in with a couple screws.
Whoa.
Diagram on the inside.
From aliens?
All right, so let's start making some connections. The first one being our main positive and negative battery connections, which are gonna go here, and that is gonna be a 4/0 wire. You're gonna go through the same process of measuring the length between the inverter and the distributor, cutting your wire.
It's that easy.
Stripping it back and crimping on lug.
So we got our positive with its lugs, and then we have two blacks. One is our negative and then our ground, and we're gonna start with our ground.
We started out with the center stud on the negative bus bar of the distributor. This is where you're gonna connect the inverter's ground. So you're gonna wanna remove all the hardware, which is a nut, a washer, and a lock washer. Then you can place the lug on, put the washer back on, then the lock washer, and then the nut, and tighten it all down. Like so. Then you can go to your inverter and connect it to that ground at the bottom. When you're connecting it, the serrated washer should remain first against the Multiplus. Then you can place your ground lug, followed by the washer, lock washer, and nut, and then tighten them all down.
Okay, so there's our finished ground, which we just ran underneath the inverter over to our Lynx distributor and up to the ground.
Now onto the negative connection. So that is gonna run all the way down here, and then it's gonna come through and then pop through here and connect to our battery negative there. And you wanna start with your negatives because they end up behind the positive line. And then it's the same process. You remove the hardware, you place your lug, and then you put that hardware back on and tighten it down.
Good.
And we're going in that hole there.
Let's get this puppy on there, like so. Silver back on, copper lock, nut. All right.
She's back.
Are you talking about the inverter?
Then for the positive connection, you just move up. There's two studs that have hardware on them. You have to remove that. But this time you're going to place a fuse, and we have a 400 amp fuse because that's what's recommended within the Multiplus user manual. So once you have that fuse on, you can then place the positive lug on the bottom stud, and then you replace all of that hardware in the same order of washer, lock washer, and nut. And again, tighten it down. So now that you have your two connections to the Lynx distributor, it's time to run those into the Multiplus.
Positive. Okay, so now we're ready to connect our inverter to shore power so that when we have access to it, we can plug in, and that way we can recharge our batteries or even preserve our batteries.
Well, first you have to be able to have a place to plug shore power into. So we had to install an inlet. All right, so we found the center point of our water inlet cutout, and it's time for us to set in our electrical port. And this is a 30 amp, 120 volt inlet. You do have a weather stripping here to keep water out. I'm gonna send a pilot hole.
I'm going back now.
I'm going back.
And this is the part where you want to tape up the body of your van before you drill a hole to protect it from any stray shards that might fly around and scratch it. We always seem to skip this part because we like to live life on the edge.
Well, we never have enough time, and I'm not thinking. I'm just going.
Good thing you wore your safety
Safety goggles!
Now we used a 2 1/4 inch hole saw, which for us ended up being a little spacious for our inlet, so you might want to size down just a bit. But to compensate for that extra amount of room, we just applied a 1/4 inch butyl strip around the edge of our inlet. And next you're gonna wanna apply some primer to the bare metal edge, just so that you don't worry about any rust. Look at the finesse. Now you're ready to pop that sucker into place.
Okay, so now I'm gonna wire in our shore power inlet. And to do that, I'm gonna be using this 10 gauge 3-wire, and I'm gonna peel that back. Boost! So this is the back cap, and what it does is it sandwiches with your bolts to hold that side in. And we've seen people do this in 2 different ways. We've seen people set the whole thing in from the exterior and also set the inlet on one side and then the housing on the other and sandwich them together, which is what we did. So to do that, we first had to fish our wire through with the plastic housing on the inside, which we didn't do a good job filming. And then once the wire was through, I made the connections on the inlet and then sandwiched them together and bought my own hardware. And then we had to use lock nuts to then tighten them all down. And it was a serious pain in the ass. I think it'd be a lot easier if you just used some self-tappers and put the plastic on the outside and just sucked it in. So you can see this is color coordinated. It's gonna end up sitting in there like so. So I'm gonna feed in my ground first. And don't worry, it's not a live wire. 2. That was pretty cool. Okay, we are connected there. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and put it in place. I'm going to set some pilot holes through, and then I've got some hardware that I went and bought myself that we're gonna use to seal this to the van.
Beautiful.
I go to the inside now, and one person on this side, one person on the other side, and we're gonna tighten these down.
And now you're ready to wire it to the inverter. So same thing, you're gonna wanna strip back about 3 inches of the white insulation and about 1/2 inch of each of the green, white, and black wires. Here's a good point where you could apply a wire ferrule to the end of each of the 3 wires, and it really just gives you a clean and easier insertion point. But since we like to struggle, we didn't do that.
Yeah, I didn't have the proper size tool, so we just had to roll with it.
So you just want to insert that wire through the entry gland and into the respective terminals on the inverter. And the correct order of that
Should go black hot wire, white neutral wire, green ground wire.
So lastly, you'll just want to tighten up those terminals to make sure that everything is tucked in snug, like a bug. All right, so the last step is to wire in your VE Bus Smart Dongle, which allows you to monitor and control the inverter via a smartphone app. So you can turn it on, off, check the levels, etc., anywhere you are. First, you'll need an itty bitty screwdriver to loosen and connect the red positive wire to the positive terminal in the VE dongle. Then you'll want to do the same for the black wire to the negative. Then you'll want to insert the positive and negative lug ends of the wires through the Multiplus entry port and the positive lug onto the open positive terminal and the negative onto the open negative terminal, and tighten those suckers up. The last thing that you'll need to connect is the RJ45 UTP cable. One end of the cable clips directly into the VE dongle, and the other end you're going to want to run through that same entry port in the Multiplus all the way up to about the center of the Multiplus. You'll see there's 2 cable ports in there, and you can use either one. They're both the same.
Now I'm gonna try to tuck it in here a little bit so it's not so much of a mess.
There is a double stick tape on the back side of the dongle. So you just want to remove that plastic film and slap it wherever you decide is the best location to mount it.
Now with all your wires connected properly, you can flick the inverter on and check the Victron Connect app. Of course, you're gonna have to do a few updates.
One thing that's nice about the app is that you can manually turn the inverter on and off within it without having to crawl under and access the actual physical inverter. You can also set the current input levels, which just kind of designate a maximum for the amount of current that should be coming in to the inverter.
I'm gonna get our cable And I'm gonna plug it into shore power and see if it kicks over any different. Because we're at 13.24 volts, right? So when we plug it in, it should kick up. All right, here's power. On my last fan, you know how many times I drove off like this? And I ripped it? Yeah. 13.46 volts. So we're climbing in power here. And if we go back over bulk charge, battery is charging with maximum current until absorption voltage is reached. So we have shore power. So now that you have both your battery and your inverter connected to that Lynx distributor, it's time to send power to your AC and DC distribution panel or panels. And that's just another subway station for your electricity to then branch out to the other items within your van, like your fans and lights and fridge, things like that. All right, so let's start with DC. On the right side of your panel, if you get the same one as ours, you'll notice there's a fuse bar, and that's where you're going to need to send power. So we're gonna be using this 6-gauge wire, which we have already cut and put our little lugs on and then heat shrinked around. We got a positive and a negative, and it's gonna run through here, out through here, and then into this area. Now you can connect those wires to the Lynx distributor just like you did with your inverter. You're gonna remove the negative hardware, connect it down to the negative bus bar. Then you're gonna remove the 2 sets of hardware for the fuse and positive bus bar, and you're gonna set your fuse in place. We used a 100-amp fuse and then placed our positive lug on top and then tighten the hardware back down on both. You can see there's little punch out holes here. So I'm going to be wiring our fuse panel here. Your negative is going to connect here, and then your positive line is going to connect here. Now to get more access back there, this tab pulls back, and you could pull this guy out like so. We're going to feed this wire through our compartment here. I need to connect my positive here, so. Then I'm going to bring my negative, slide that negative in there.
It's lighting up.
Okay, those are connected. And with that, you have power to the DC side of your panel. And if you're curious how to make connections to all your DC appliances, you can go and refer to our previous video where we did a little demonstration wiring in some lights, I think. But we'll provide a link to that within the description. Okay, so now let's talk about the AC.
For this, we ran a connection from our Multiplus inverter to the distribution panel using 6-3 wire, which is a huge pain in the butt. Okay, so this is our 6-3 wire. So it's 6 gauge and there's 3 of them, obviously. And we're using it to run the inverter to our fuse panel.
Which is down there.
So that we have 120 volt power for our outlets. So this is the port, the entry port that came out of entry gland. Yeah, that came out of the inverter. This guy stays on the inside, and that's what we, clamp it together with. But this part of it, we need to get on our wire. We're about to struggle, I think, a fair amount.
Yeah, people use Dawn soap to help.
Okay, so I got 2.
Oh. Nice.
We're gonna trim 5/8 back so the wire is exposed, and then we'll be able to make our connection. So we're ready. We have our gland all situated where we want it. We have green on top, white in the middle, black on the bottom, right? So in we go. It makes it a lot easier to connect to the inverter if you add ferrules to the end of your wires, but like we said earlier, we didn't have the right crimping tool, and so it is possible to do it without. It's just a lot harder. So once you have all 3 wires inserted into their appropriate terminals, you just want to make sure to go back and tighten the entry gland.
Okay, we got it on there, as you could tell. And now we have to run it to our fuse panel, which you got to pull off, which is right. Yeah. Okay, so now coming from our inverter, we have this 6-3 wire, and we need to connect it to our main fuse panel. So we have a 50-amp main breaker that we're going to connect to with the black wire here, and then you have the grounds and neutrals going to the bottom bus bars here. So I'm gonna put one here and put one here. So this guy is gonna end up fishing through. Come on, baby. Okay. you take your green ground wire and place it to the ground bus bar, and then you take your white neutral wire and place it to the neutral bus bar and flick it on, and now you have power to that AC distribution panel. And if you're curious how to put another fuse in there and then say power your outlets, again, you can go and refer to our AC/DC video that we just released 2 weeks ago. And that's that, okay? You've got power to your panel, which then goes to all your devices. Pretty cool. Okay, so now if I flip these breakers, this light should kick on. It's this guy.
Bar light.
It's one of my film lights. We're gonna throw 50 amp on, so that should just bring power to the bay here, and then I throw this on.
We got outlets, baby.
We have an outlet.
An outlet.
So we've now covered our batteries and we've covered our inverter. So we have a way to charge those batteries off of shore power and then bring AC power to our van and DC power to our van. So now we're going to talk about how we can charge it with solar, and we can charge it through the van's alternator using a DC to DC charger. We're not going to go super in depth on our solar setup in this video. We're just going to go through how we connected the charge controller to our system, but in our next video coming out in a few weeks, we'll go over the panels we have and how we mounted them and how we ran the wires from our roof down into our main electrical system. But just to give you an idea of what we have, it's 3 200-watt solar panels, and the charge controller we used was the Smart Solar MPPT 100-50. And the purpose of the charge controller is to take all that energy gathered by the solar panels and bring it down into your system so that you can charge batteries. So the power from your panels are gonna run down into your van through a little 50 amp breaker, then into the charge controller, which then is gonna run to that Lynx distributor to distribute power throughout your system. Now the reason we put a fuse breaker there is so that if you ever need to work on your system, you can cut the power from the solar panels, and then you won't have to worry about live wires while you're working on something. Now that 50 amp breaker needs a housing, so we installed a small divider beside our batteries and mounted our breaker box directly to it. All right.
So we took the housing off because we have to punch holes in the top and the bottom for the exit and the entry for our cables.
There. Now Julie's gonna show you what happens. It's gonna end up looking like that.
But how? All right, and we're back. So this is your port of entry, and you gotta take it all apart. You smash it in there, then you have 2 pieces left. So we go 1 on the inside, snug it up, and then we're gonna put our wires through it, and once the wires are through, we'll cinch this down.
Ta-da!
She's a pro.
2 wires.
So all you need to do is take the 10 gauge positive and negative wires running from your solar panels and set them into the top of your 50 amp breaker. Then you can connect your 50 amp breaker to the charge controller by running more 10 gauge wire out the bottom of the 50 amp breaker and into the charge controller.
Just make sure whatever orientation you have the wires coming from the panels into that breaker match the way you have it coming out. So if the negative's on the left side of the breaker, on the bottom, make sure the negative's on the left side of the breaker. We got our main power from the solar panels coming in, and there's our little breaker, and then if you flick it on, it sends power into our smart controller. Then from that charge controller, you can connect to the Lynx distributor. And we use 6 gauge wire from that. You're going to remove the hardware, connect your negative, and then you're going to remove more hardware, connect your fuse. For us, it was an 80 amp fuse, and then your positive lug, and then all the hardware goes back on. You tighten it all down. Just like that. So on the side here, you're gonna see there's a ground connection, which we're gonna disconnect to heat shrink that on. But that then runs to where we have the ground for our system. And with that, you have solar set up. And again, this is Bluetooth, so you can connect to it using the Victron app and set all the parameters for the amount of solar you have and the kind of battery bank you're charging, all that kind of stuff.
Now, the very last component we added into our system was the Orion DC to DC charger. DC to DC chargers are used in dual battery systems where the alternator and the start battery are used to charge the house battery. That way you can charge your battery while your engine is running, giving you a third method of charging your system. Now this connection is going to be different depending on what year and type of van you have. We have a 2016 Mercedes Sprinter, so this is how it worked out for us.
We started out by measuring out our wire. This was going to be the longest connection we had to make, and we had to run from our Lynx distributor, which was located all the way back between the rear wheel wells to the front of the van, just below the driver's side feet, because that's where the van's battery is housed. And in order to clear a path to run that wire from the back of the van to the front, we needed to remove some of our insulation. We had to pull off the driver's side seat, which is held down with 4 bolts and has 2 electrical connections. You should make sure to disconnect the battery negative, which there's like a quick disconnect located just below the driver's steering wheel, because if you pull those seat electrical connections off without doing that, you're going to end up with an SRS,
a safety system warning that it's been disconnected improperly.
And
it won't go away
No.
even if you reconnect.
It's actually pretty light. We're just gonna put it to the side. There we go. And then we had to pull some of the plastics off up by the driver's side feet to then expose a panel that we had to remove that housed the van's battery.
So after figuring that all out, we cut our 6-gauge wire and ran it all the way from our Lynx distributor through our walls, underneath our cab paneling, into the front driver's seat, and then back out the driver's seat and into the battery
Housing panel.
spot. We then stripped, crimped, and shrink wrapped our 6-gauge wire to connect it to the Lynx distributor, like every other connection to the Lynx distributor. And we also used a 60 amp fuse for that connection. Okay, so now we're taking the negative and the positive opposite ends of our wires and putting them into the output of the DC to DC charger. A little finesse. Good. Good.
Okay, look at that runway. Look at this, just power runway. Then it was time to head back to the front of the van. Now in our 2016 Sprinter, in the battery bay, just to the side of it, you're gonna find this little like fuse box. And when you crack it open, you'll see that there are 6 wire connections there, and we had one little open bay, and that's where we were going to make our connection. But we didn't have the proper size fuse. Because it's so small, you need to have this very tiny specific fuse called a MIDI fuse. And we couldn't seem to find one of those at a local store, so we had to then order it, wait a few days, and come back to it. As you could see here, 60 amp AMI or MIDI fuse. And we would be putting it right here, and the holes are again not big enough. So I'm gonna have to widen those out and then get that on there, and then we're gonna connect our positive to this end like the rest of these wires and then get it back down there. Make sure when you put this on, it's gonna go down here on this part. I was afraid Julie might put it on the wrong side. You put it over the fuse itself. Okay, there's that connection.
Back on. Okay, so we got our nuts. There's one. There we go, just like that.
Our positive was good, but then we had to figure out where to connect the negative line. Instead of hooking it up within the battery bay, we then just kept the same length of wire, routed it back underneath the driver's seat, and connected it to a pre-existing stud that some of the electrical underneath the seat was wired to. Once we had that connected, we put the seat back on the way we found it, we connected those wires back together, and then finally threw that ground back on. We're connecting our battery, our vehicle's battery now, to the Orion. So all those cables we were running up to the front seat are here, and we're just cutting them to size. Okay, now we're gonna strip those and put them into the input side of the Orion. So right now you have this, and you'll see if you've got it connected to both your power source here and the battery, you're gonna have Bluetooth access. You see it's showing Orion. So now you can see I've switched it over to the charger mode, and it says off. Engine shutdown detected because it's turned off. But this kit comes with this little guy right here, this little Lego. And this is, I believe, the remote on off, and it says right here, remote on off eliminates the need for a high current switch in the input wiring. The remote on off can be operated with a low power switch or by, for example, the engine run stop switch. So I believe if we have the parameters set for this guy now, we can take this.
There.
Julie's famous for hitting me with the microphone. And then slide that in there, just like so. And then I'm gonna kick power on. We jumped on the app and set the parameters and turned the vehicle on, and within a few minutes we saw that we were receiving a charge from the vehicle into our bank.
Now there we go. Okay, it just took a minute. It took a minute.
Bulk charge. And that's it. That is our entire electrical system minus details with the solar setup. I just hope that it helps a few of you in some way, or at least gives you the right resources to go chase after to help install your system. Now we know this isn't the cheapest one out there, and there's a lot of variations depending on your build out, and there's a lot of different avenues you could take depending on your budget. And yeah, you can buy one of those little portable banks like a Goal Zero, and that can work. But if you have more, I don't know, robust needs, this is something you need to start looking into. And I can't recommend enough going to check out Explorist.Life. It's an amazing resource that everyone should be using, and I can't keep recommending them enough.
And if there's anything specific that you guys would like us to explain more in depth or kind of dive into in a future video, leave that in the comments, because you know, we have nothing to do all day and we get really bored. Yeah. So, you know, if there's anything you want us to do more, we have so much time.
Either way, we appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. And if you've made it all this way, thumbs up, achievement, 50 points.
And we'd really like to thank our partners, Battleborn, for helping us determine exactly what we needed out of our system, because they provided assistance from an actual Battleborn engineer, which helped us calculate all of our power needs for what appliances we would be running.
Yeah. Oh, and if you didn't see, you know, earlier I said subscribe. You should, if you haven't done it, you should do that. Ring the cowbell.
It doesn't cost you anything.
No.
But it costs us everything.
Okay.
Subscribe, like, comment. Even if you're gonna be mean, it helps us.
Yeah, rip us a new one.
Okay. See you later.
So I wanted to tell you guys about my latest injury. I'll show you.
Can you see it? Yeah.
We had the dogs in the dog park, and the dog park gates are spring loaded. So it slammed shut behind me, grabbed hold of my ankle, shaved all of my skin off. So I wanted to ask you, what's your most embarrassing injury? What's your
Let's hear it.
most embarrassing?
I broke a nose on a trash can trying to jump off of it with a skateboard. And that's why I have this really cool nose.
Okay, bye again.